hopefully it's recording.
Yeah.
Recording has started. Perfect. So now the sharing was from where here? From
Here. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The best is here to do the whole window.
This one.
Only if you want both. You want,
Both. Do I want podcast? Yeah.
you also want it on the screen here, I guess. I'm seeing it.
Better to make it here is somehow the person outside, but maybe this needs a media thing.
Side by side. Still looking at this one. Probably needs to get extended.
We are trying to solve the technical stuff.
Yeah, should work.
Switch. I'm not allowed to earn anyone. This is force majeure situation. No. And unfortunately, is a week. There is. And optical breakfast. I was thinking, she's a leader. She can be finished one. But it's something like that. I didn't realize that the religion is actually very much doing that. I think yeah, don't think she could have been helping. Exactly. I'm not a, it was my genuine intention. Like I would do that if I'm alone.
Oh,
Thanks,
yeah,
Martin.
you cut and paste in the video, I assume.
Yeah. I will. This I can.
So that's
So
is it? I'm not going to sit in front of your screen.
Oh
It would be, yeah. So, yeah. I think I'll sit on the side then.
No, sit here.
But you're not blocking the whole screen. Oh, sorry. Okay. It is. I'm seeing this.
I can't help. I don't see
Get
it.
a little towel. Then.
One of the ladies also went. I always had classes in that building. Long time ago. It's beautiful here.
Yeah.
Though. Everything is really well done.
When I was studying, it was still lots.
We are
smaller.
starting.
Yeah,
We are waiting.
this building was here in Boston, Ontario.
So this is really new.
Yeah.
Oh,
Or I'm very old.
I don't know. They're also very beautiful old universities like
Yeah.
Gent, Oxford,
Been
but
to
mine
Harvard,
is
it's,
old and ugly. So- So we are waiting for a fourth person. Yep. I hope also yours are proper. Mine is also broken. So you see if I try.
This was very easy. I just listed it up. And
Mm,
it's,
they're very unstable.
but I know that. So usually
Yeah, see?
you don't make the same mistake. No. Thanks a lot for the call.
Create a few more job.
Makes my job easy.
So I think we will start now. The fourth person has said that he's stuck in traffic kind of thing, a train somewhere in Gouda. Perhaps he'll take us some Gouda trip. And we can start without him. He will make one of the interventions later on. He bared me almost give him the presentation yesterday over Zoom, so he's completely on board with what we'll be talking about. Also, an old friend of mine. So let me first start by introducing myself because with we don't know each other. My name is Annie Tubadji. I'm a cultural and regional economist. So I hailed from interest in arts, and then people in my family said, well, you have to eat, so we want you to use your mathematical skills and go study economics. Economics and finance is what I studied first. And I found it, well, I finished with flying colors, and I found it excruciatingly boring because there was nothing about people in the whole story. So I went to work in a bank. And the bank said that they find me overly ambitious because I want to definitely work with their cultural resources, which is obviously the highest levels. Upon which I started working for the United Nations. And there discovered the path towards more humane side of economics, turned back, made a master's in development studies, then went to make a labor economics PhD. And in all this journey, I was trying to understand what is the role of culture in the socioeconomic development and where it has been tackled by these different aspects of economics that I was seeing. And I never really found out anybody doing the kind of economics that I was interested in. I wanted an economics that explains me how culture emerges in economic terms, and then how this makes a difference for the places where culture has emerged, right? I heard many beautiful, robust, strong, rigorous economic explanations of many other things, but not about culture. And I heard a lot of interesting explanations about culture, which were put in very flowery and interesting ways, but absolutely not using any of the standard classical methodology of economics. I was thinking that can't be right, right? You can ask the question about culture and answer it with the economic methodology, right? You can use supply and demand. You could, and then when I started requesting this, I started finding out further aspects of economics, which were not dealing with development, but were dealing with culture by applying the market principle. They, however, were looking at culture as the end of the story. How do we produce cultural goods? So essentially, they were talking about the partial equilibrium markets, right? On the market for books, what's happening, on the market for theaters, what's happening, on the market for festivals, what's happening. And this here conference has a lot of people who are doing this thing. But I was impressed with that. But I was also, meanwhile, working now in the public sector in my country, which was the Agency for Economic Analysis and Planning, right? And there the big question was, we want evidence why we have to give money to culture. And now I can't just go, oh, it's beautiful and I love it very much, They wanted to give my evidence the way that the others were doing it. And the other sectors would be able to tell me what is their contribution to the overall development. So again, I turn to this question, why culture matters, right? In the socioeconomic context. And again, my friends in the culture sector were not answering it the way this question needed to be answered. They were doing proper economics, but they were answering other questions in economics. Right. So it was a long quest, being a lonely soldier in going to different kind of conferences, going to sociological conferences, going to anthropological conferences, going to things which are very much, econometric oriented, applied economics, going to theoretical things of public choice and game theoretical things. And they all were doing fascinating methodological exercises, which I was seeing better and better applicable to my focus question, why culture matters, right? But I was never seeing people addressing this particular question. Now, spoiler, yesterday I went over the, I think you're not for this session, but you're trapped here, so you'll be exposed to it. So the why question was never addressed, and even less often with the economic methodology which I want. It was always misunderstood why I'm doing it, right? I never found a tribe that wants to answer this question. So I took a look at the program yesterday, and I started seeing that, especially among the young scholars, there were about 10 people who were doing that. But my most favorite was a contribution by a lady who is from, I think, from London School of Economics, who had done something with the Akerlof model, the market for land. But what she did, well, it's a very famous model, right? It's fantastic methodologically wise to say, okay, you have people for painting, and we don't know what's the value of these paintings, and the middlemen, who are the dealers, they are reducing the uncertainty about this quality, right? But it again remains locked in the domain of culture is the outcome. We focus on the painting and the information about the painting. And the so what, the why this matters, is not present. So very sad, because my book starts with the market for lemons, but applied for answering this other question. And I'll go this into details in a moment. Then, you didn't miss much. I'm now just explaining the story of why this book was written. Then you have other people who, young people especially, about 10 scholars among the scholars who presented, right, who have tried to address similar questions on the way of why culture matters, but they all are starting from where I started when I was this lonely soldier out there and trying to find my tribe. So I wrote this book with the hope that everybody who is interested in the question why culture matters gets his time saved for all the journey that I went through different disciplines, and takes the benefit from me summarizing and translating the things I found on the way in a decent economic translation of it, so that they can start thinking of this question faster together in a kind of a synchronized way, because then we can compare our findings. There was a lady who was, I think, who was trying to create a scale for measuring the impact from culture. Well, been there, hit my head on it. Actually, this was the first thing that my PhD supervisor asked me to do when I was in Germany with the Labor Institute. So I have thought about this, and I have cross-checked a lot throughout the literature how people are doing that. That's the summary that you'll find in this book. So how the book is structured. It is presenting my answer. I call it a paradigm. Culture-based development is a paradigm because it is, paradigm means worldview. So my worldview is this particular question: why culture emerges and why it matters for socio-economic development. Both things are important, because once you answer the question why it matters, then the policymakers aspect is why does it emerge? So how do I change that? Because there is another group of economists who are not very much presented here, who think that culture is God-given, and then are fascinated from their empirical work, and all the time that there is a whole body of literature saying, oh, culture matters, right? And they do the answering of the why part of the question correctly, in the sense they would give you an example that the Roman sandal matters, and then they'll give you an example that the plow matters, right? So these are elements of cultural change that happened here and there in history, right? But why did they emerge? How can we have now a Roman sandal effect generated? This we cannot have. So, but these are valuable pieces, and we learn a lot from them. So the book is structured by giving the culture-based development paradigm view, and then makes a summary of the relevant literature. And the relevant literature comes from many different sources. I have structured it, grouped it, which is from sociology, which is from where, and saying how these different sources inform finally my decision to recommend that we approach answering the why culture matters in the way that culture-based development does. At the end, there is, at the end of every chapter, there is also a recommendation about policymakers, how now they can make sense and use of this particular chapter of CBD. So what we will do today is the first stop of my caravan of CBD, going to different conferences and launching the book. I'm going back to these different tribes that let me live among them, although they're not exactly my tribe, and spreading the word to other people who are interested in this perspective, because I always found 1 or 2 or 3 people trying to work in this trajectory of why culture matters. So I want to share it, and at every event, there will be 8 such events at different conferences. At every event, I will present same story, but from a different, adapted for the audience perspective. So here I will talk about, obviously, cultural economists. I will go to the Regional Economics Conference in Athens. Hello, welcome. There it will be presented more from the regional economics perspective by me. But in any case, culture-based development is very heavily multidisciplinary informed paradigm. That's why we will have a roundtable. It won't be just me talking to you about it. I definitely will. First of all, I very much love talking. And second, it will be about 40 minutes, with which I will go over the main content, what you can find in the book. Then I'll make the spoilers of giving the cultural economics perspective adaptation, but then the other people will bring the multidisciplinary aspects. So Martin will wear 2 hats, and he will give both the well-being economics, happiness economics perspective, because he is the president of the International Society of Quality of Life Studies, and also he is very heavily involved in things which are, and not only, he's also here head of the center which is dealing with happiness economics in Erasmus University. As you know, and also he's very much working with the Regional Economics Association. So he will give also the regional economics perspective of CBD. Then Masoud, who is still about to come, is another dear friend of mine with whom we were PhD students together. He's one of the people who has applied culture-based development from the early start of his career, being a very good quantitative economist, right? And he will share his experience, especially from quantitative perspective. And then, last but not least, our lady here, Hannah, who is a policymaker. So she's from the Municipality of Rotterdam. She's advising them on something which is very unique and beautiful. Rotterdam obviously have asked themselves the question, why culture matters? Have answered it, well, it matters for making cohesion, and they're pushing as practitioners to do that. But, you know, if we are about to be evidence-based, we should push together, right? So that's why there's a success story which has been proactively generated before my knowledge has come out of the policymakers' world. And really, it's a great celebration, and also to find out, once a policymaker does this, what questions emerge. So this is what you will hear in this first presentation. I will be going to the other stops of the caravan. There will be some in Wales, some in Vancouver, some in Luxembourg, the ISQOLS, the Quality of Life conference. Then in Athens too, the one will be on the regional economics, and the other on the Evolutionary Economics Association, because there are a lot of interesting people who are doing complex theory and stuff like that. So the complexity guys in this slot are my dearest people, as well as the institutional economists, evolutionary institutional economists, which are the 2 complete spectrums. The one are heavily mathematical, the other hate mathematics. Okay, but they do very interesting things, both of them. So I will be sharing this on the website of Culture-Based Development, and there is also a YouTube channel where you can go and listen to the recordings of every presentation. And of course, they will be different from different perspectives, respectively, going deeper into the pockets of what CBD is. So what we will hear today will be first the concept of the book, then 3 perspectives from which I would like to highlight it for cultural economists. First of all, I want to make clear what is the difference between cultural economics and economics of culture, and how CBD stands for within this distinction. Okay, it's a very important distinction to make. Then we will go deeper into the use of Bourdieu. So now, depending which world you come from, there are many different ways that you can relate with Bourdieu. Some understand that he's one of the biggest thinkers. Yesterday, Alan Turing was himself citing in his wonderful presentation, by the way, about the use of culture by wannabe dictators, right? How they handle culture in order to create knowledge for those who were not there, a little recap. And the answer is through the Bourdieu mechanism. Unfortunately, when I was among one of the best economists in the University of Bologna, the professor with whom I was working, and he was very fond of me for the statistical work of what I was doing, saying, Annie, what is this obscure sociologist, right? Just forget about him, like nothing in the vicinity of obscure. But this was the attitude that Bourdieu was facing. So we will focus a little bit on why cultural capital by Bourdieu, the most original of his contributions, is really pivotal in understanding and explaining why culture matters. And because it makes a parallel with the human capital. And this is the biggest power why, right? You could think of culture in terms of, oh, it's a public good, and it is a public good. For that matter, education is a public good. But after you're being educated, we don't count how many books you buy in order to be educated. We say the impact is because of the human capital that you have got, which is the ideas that are in your head. Well, the same should be with the cultural capital. Like there is a public good or mixed good, just like education mixed good, one consumes it, everybody is affected. So you buy, again, books or films or whatever, and the impact is not that sales were made. I mean, for the industry itself, this is end of game. But more important is you are different now. And the skills that you develop are emotional. While the skills from education, human capital, are technical, cognitive skills. When you're exposed to culture, this develops your emotions. And this comes from the biggest element of the answer of the question why culture matters. We need culture in order to make sense of reality, in order to make meaning. And in this process, we want to reduce our uncertainty about this world. This is the main reason why culture, this is the need that culture answers. It creates our emotions. It's a code that is telling us what is good and what is bad for our survival. And that's where our emotions come from. Fear is the biggest emotion that it addresses. It informs it with certain code, which make the behaviors of others more predictable, further calmer, then it's evolutionary kind of. All right, but the last will become the first, they say. So, for you can grab it. So, the last aspect that I just highlighted. So, culture is a capital that matters for the emotions and how people manage to handle them. It needs careful planning, just like educating. You have a proper curriculum. So somebody has to cater for the curriculum. And well, for education, it is the schools, but also there is a national curriculum. Well, this is what policymakers should be looking at. What is the curriculum? How we know what we have to provide? And here is a big highlight. We are not talking about a kind of paternalism and interference in the things. We are talking about catering the development of skills, people being able to use their emotional spectrum as educated people and not being just victims to whatever happens to them, right? It's like physical education here. When you have sports, I don't say whether after you make your muscles, you will go climb a mountain or help somebody on the street, or if you want, you may eventually fight others, with the sports. It's up to you, but I'm teaching you how to use your body. Here, with culture, I help you to learn how to balance your views. Now, later on, what problems will be solved is entirely up to you. But you are able now to have different perspectives and to appreciate both one's own knowledge and the knowledge of others. I'll go into the details of this. And actually, this is an old idea which was called aesthetic education. Okay, but aesthetic education is understood in a very philosophical and ethical way because there's where it came from as an idea. And it doesn't have any evidence-based policy making. So how much aesthetic education I have done and how much ethical behavior essentially has produced, this is just not there, right? But it is there in many other fields. And then when you go on the table of asking for money, this is the argument that you need to support with evidence. In order to say, dudes, whatever you do, if you don't have this most important glue, which is cultural capital, that makes possible for people in the economy to work together, you just don't have the economy. And this is something which people have already told them in economic terms, okay? This was said both by Gary Becker, who was saying, well, it's not efficient to hate, but people continue. Right? And it was told by Akrelov in the Market for Rents, who was saying, if people don't know the exact quality, it might be people wanting people, seeking for cars, but there will be no market for cars. The only problem of these great ideas is they started from, given that people hate and given that there is a need for cars. And culture-based development makes one step back. It says, well, why there is hate in the first place? And then what happens after it is there? Okay, it is mobile. But if you understand why it exists in the first place, you will understand also why the mechanism suggested by Becker does not disappear. You'll understand why it is not free market, as he's explaining it, or there is another component which he's not taking into consideration, which is the endogeneity of this taste. And I'm going very much deeply into modeling the endogeneity of the taste for discrimination when you understand how culture emerges on the market for values. So these will be the special things that we will go in further details later. And then I will stop talking because it will be more than enough listening to me, and the people will start plugging in with their perspectives as already announced. So let us go first into the book. If you have the book, what you'll find in it. The initial idea for the structure of the book was that there will be a preface, and I'll spend some time talking about it. First of all, because now you can find the preface on the website of the culture-based development paradigm, which I've made and I sort of maintained. I've not included it in the rest of the book now, what is published, because I decided that it is too playful. It is written as a mnemonic explanation why culture matters. It can be used as a technique for giving people a flavor when they're starting to study culture-based development. The Robinson Crusoe story has been used many times in order to give a stylized, simplified model. I'm using it, but explaining the cultural role in a simple economy. Okay? But you will see there that there is a long way to tell in a story. So there are many steps of modeling and explaining that need to be done in order the standard Robinson Crusoe story to make sense of culture. So I'm making all these steps actually in the book. And what are the steps? First, you have to make some notions introduced from other disciplines and also to translate them in economic terms. This is done in the first part of the book, which is the first 5 chapters of all 10 chapters of it. The notions then plugged into each other like a Russian doll. Hello? We are just starting to talk about this. So then they end up with defining how the cultural capital creates the most important thing, cultural bias. Now you notice the book was orange as cover. Okay. The reason for this is that it is essentially based on two very inspirational for me books. The one is The Taste for Discrimination of Gary Becker. The other is Ariel Rubinstein's work on modeling boundary rationality. Both happen to be orange, like this book is the connection between the two. So the modeling bounded rationality has one very important argument there that Ariel makes, but does not go into further explaining. He says, whatever we know about choice, there is a thing which is the permissible set, from which the whole game depends how the choice will be actually made. Whatever the mechanism, it really matters what will be allowed to be chosen from, right? Well, culture is exactly this. It tells you what is permitted and what is not permitted to be chosen, right? And then if culture does not permit you to love something, it might be possible, it might be rational, it might be in your interest, but you do not do that, okay? Because the permissible set is excluding it. So the two can be bound if you understand how culture emerges. If this is the thing that spoils the cake. And I give examples for the spoilers of this thing, which I call cultural bias. Okay, so since this is the efficient set that you should choose from, and instead of this, you have a subset, so you have a loss of efficiency from the presence of culture. So then that's how cultural bias is defined. And there are two types of effects, direct and indirect effects. The direct effects are when you take into consideration the cultural characteristic of the product or whatever item of choice, country where you're going to and where you will live and work and so on. And then you directly factor it as an element of your choice. There are indirect effects. Because you have chosen to be in a certain country, well, this country now will have more people who are from somewhere else, right? And when it starts making trains, you will be one of those part of making it, and they won't be in delay all the time. Or you will be a country that depends on engineers, but hates engineers from India. Well, they happen to be quite good. So then they want to make engineering thing, no proper engineers for that, right? Or nurses for that matter, or whatever kind of necessary professions, which then in the implementation of their work, hopefully won't be that much treated with discrimination, but they won't be there because they were discriminated as consumers on other markets and in another set of their identity. We'll go into the exact examples. Now, the last one, beyond CBD, is also an important element. It has already the background of knowing what CBD is doing, the definitions, applying it in 4 different cases, which are cases for the in-between and extreme values of the bias, of the cultural bias. I'll go into this on the next slide. But the last chapter, the value-free analysis of values, is a sum up of what it means to use the culture-based development paradigm. It is value-free analysis of cultural values. So why is it value-free? Because I'm not ending up with the conclusion, this is the good culture, this is the bad culture. What I'm doing, I'm saying, this is how culture has emerged. This is what culture is present here in terms of its structure, not in terms of its quality. Because of its structure, the people will be more or less prone to cooperate, whatever their culture is. What I'm interested in is what will be their effect on cooperation and inspiration. Inspiration for others, inspiration for themselves. Because the best way that you can help, from humanistic point of view, the best way that you can help the society is, first of all, to work on your own improvement. If we all are identical, the improvement of one always improves the group, right? And then on this one will contribute, cooperate, each others, and whatever. The cooperation also matters. So also it makes it explicit that there is no place for hidden paternalism. It is obvious that what culture impacts, what your interest in what culture impact, will be productivity, will be the well-being, mental health, and this is driven by policy decision. So nobody can manipulate you with culture-based development. Then their argument only will be, given that I have chosen this outcome, I can show you that culture contributes 50% to its achievement or 5% to its achievement, and that's why I'm funding it heavily or weakly and so on. So it's really providing value-free, in other words, evidence-based and sincerely evidence-based backup to a responsibly taken and explicitly taken political direction for what we are doing as society. Rather than nudging you and making you choose things, thinking that you have a free will, well, actually somebody is pulling, even if it's for the good, it's not respectful to the people. Well, if they're enough innocent and ignorant not to understand that they're manipulated, this will work. If they get it, they will not respond to the treatment. And even worse, if you have a lot of ignorant people, which is quite like the case, stupidity is really prevalent, then the problem is if you are a good guy who wants to feed people and make donation of blood rise and you're a wonderful dictator, you'll use it for good things. But just like the atomic energy, well, some people from the other spectrum can use it if that's the tool to manipulate stupid societies. And then stupid societies doing really stupid things. I don't have to explain you. We're in the lab for it on this little ball called our globe. So now let's see where you can find the little Robinson Crusoe story of culture-based development. This is the website. So it is really culture-based-development.com, very easy to find and remember. In it, there are many different types of information and sections. In the section for the book, you have a PDF file where one can download it and enjoy it. I think it's a fun story, but it definitely does not give the structured and clear approach that the book really does. And because it takes about 10 pages to say the story of Robinson Crusoe in the culture-based development sense, I cut it away and I said, okay, we start from the beginning, properly organized. So what are the 5 aspects? First of all, I give a definition of culture. This is something many people have been very lazy, unwilling, and irresponsible about. They have said, no, but the one approach is we leave it to other sciences. How can you work with something somebody else will define for the purposes of a different kind of approach of handling the answer? The other way is cherry picking randomly. So, oops, this guy is famous. What did he say about culture? Boom, that will be the definition of culture. Why did he choose? Why, again, what is his research question? Why he's interested in culture in this way? He's famous enough, and I'm famous enough, and this will publish the paper, which is just really dangerous if you take seriously your responsibility of making something which is accurate and precise, let alone that it's not accurate. But if you do it this way, you're risking that you're not doing things precisely. So you're certainly making a very misleading model. You look like you're creating a culturally augmented model, curing the absence of culture, but actually by counting it in a wrong way, you're making under specification of the model. Again, it is a wrong model. So you either don't respect yourself when you're dealing with culture as a person who knows the rules for, theoretical empirical work in economics, or you genuinely don't know that. So I don't know why people are doing it, but the effect is big no. Okay, it's not precise to do that. So we have to define culture properly if we are to handle it properly as economists. Now, in what sense? It has to be defined in terms of its function, how it is produced, and it has to be defined in its entirety. The definition has to take into consideration all that this entity is. If it really matters, as everybody is shouting now for the last 10 years, this has been sort of brought back on the table. The moral philosophers were there, then the value-free economics in the sense of cutting culture entirely from the scene appeared for some decades. Then there were these people that you'll find even in Cambridge, because of their deontologies or really heavily, heterodox economists who did wonderful thinking without any of the neoclassical methods of economics. And then people start percolating. Oops, there are institutions here. So Douglas North, many of the people from the old institutions say he stole many things from Vedler. He didn't steal them, he translated them in new classical language, what this means, talking then about uncertainty and how culture is the source of curing this uncertainty, as I already mentioned in the beginning of the talk. So the first thing here about culture is it matters. It has to be measured in all its entirety. Then what it is? There are many ways that you can think about the culture. We said it's not a separate Roman sandal, or it's not just the museums, or just the festivals, or just an element of it. Well, if you start reading again from people who have written why culture matters, one of the names that really stands out is Max Weber. Now, this guy started sort of sociology and economics at the same time as a main pillar. And his take was oversimplified the literature, but if you read his book, his first book on the Protestant ethics, I confess in English I read it, on almost every page, he mentions the key thing that culture is, according to him, attitudes. Okay? It's not religion. He approximates it with religion. In modern terms, religion for him is a proxy. But he talks about the attitudes that people have. Now, this is beautiful because it defines us very neatly what culture is. Culture is this attitude towards each and everything in the world. Our emotional attitude. Is it good or is it bad? When you're born, you're tabula rasa. If you are thrown to the wolves and they're kind enough not to eat you but to feed you, there are no such cases, you won't develop even language skills, let alone any of the variation system that humans have. And the same child, if it is adopted in the other end of the world by other people, of course there will be some genetic thing, but it will have completely different upbringing and value system in comparison to if it was where it came from. So this encoding of culture in us gives us the ability to understand what is good and bad. Why and how this becomes important in economics. Now, here we can have many theories, many beautiful explanations, which don't matter for an economist. For an economist, this thing is essentially we have the birth of our utility. So utility comes from the cultural coding if things are good or bad. Okay. Now, how does culture decide if something is good and bad? Well, it's a memory of the experiential path of those before us. The only way to know if something is good or bad, if you are, tabula rasa, is to poke it. Problem is, if you poke it, it may kill you. So instead of poking a snake, you trust your mommy who has breastfed you and who has protected you from many things, that she says, no, for this thing. And in this way, what's good and what's bad for just about everything is influenced by those who come before us, and we trust them because they are the ones that, since we perked on this world, have been guaranteeing our survival. And we need culture and we need this code of good and bad in order to keep surviving. The other beautiful thing is that economists have messed up everything about utility. They started with it, they talked about it, there were a lot of beautiful models about it, and then said, well, that's really difficult to compare between people. There were many technological aspects that why don't we simplify stuff and we just look at preference, what people will prefer to have, this or the other. And then this defines the choice, what they will choose. Not to look into the degree of what's good and bad, but what is better. Right? Now that makes sense. That makes the possibility of making precise modeling what will happen once you have certain preferences, clear and powerful, and a lot of the modeling is done this way. But it leaves the problem that, well, you don't know why people want to do this, right? And then you're completely unable to change it. Well, I know that if there are a lot of Nazis, they'll kill everybody. But I'd rather do something about it than just know it, right? I can show you very precisely how many people will die, depending on how many Nazis are out. But that's by far not what is interesting to me, let alone if I'm a policymaker. And just knowing it is a horror show and not real handling if you don't understand the cause of it. So nice from theoretical point of view to know that this code, how it emerges. Now, how the translation happens. Translation of the understanding which exists in different disciplines in economic terms. If you have all the attitudes for everything, you will have the perfect mapping of the preferences for the world. And it is a set. It's a thing set because there are things in our surrounding, at least to our knowledge. But it is very big, and also we have propensity to satisfy. And when there is a lot of choice, we just reduce it to set. And the way that we do it is known to some sociologists is the control step. So we essentially try to organize everything in terms of a percentage probability of this affecting us in terms of surviving or not surviving, because we said this is the first thing that it serves for. And then I may like it more or better or whatever because of idiosyncratic things, but generally I'm trying to make sense of this trigger in terms of what percentage of survival this gives me or not. And this percentage survival, or percentage of certainty that I avoid the other side of it, through adopting the code, becomes comparable between the different choices and translates them into order of preferences. The more uncertainty avoids, and the more security and certainty it gives you in choice and survival advantage it guarantees you, the higher it's ranked as a preference, and vice versa. But we don't know neither the whole list nor all the preferences to which people would reduce in order to make the. So then in empirical and applied work, we have to do the best possible world of empirical approach to quantifying couch. We have to reduce the complexity of it in a meaningful way. So many people who don't quite understand or want to engage with the real theoretical aspects of complexity, they will use the fact that, culture is complex, but then they will use it as an excuse to make any kind of fantastic things around. Well, when something is complex, in order to make sense, as we already said from behavioral and psychological people, you have to reduce the complexity. And if you're doing it as an economist, you don't just do it satisfyingly, you want to do it in a precise manner. And complexity theory is there for this reason. So it's how do you reduce the complexity of things? You have to find out the meaningful subcomponents till you exhaust this entity to 100%. And it's exactly what we want in order to know that we have really used all the necessary components. So we don't under-quantify what culture is. We have all the 100% in, and we don't have multiple linearity of putting more and more useless indicators that already tell us the same thing, which also will make our estimation heavy and dependent on the number of preferences, reducing the degrees of freedom. So how we do that? Once you have realized as a worldview, as a paradigm that this is what you want to do, the methods are already there. They use them for other things. So any kind of data reduction method here will do you a fantastic job. I'm very much fond of partially square path modeling, which is one way of going for it. You could use structural equation modeling. I'm also very often using the principal component analysis, which is mix between factor analysis, principal component analysis, and a very data respectful approach, where you let the data speak. You do not define the things a priori. You ask the data to identify the components, and then by looking what are the logics, you decide what are they, what are these components. I've done this for the last 15 years or so, and there is one component which is heavily loaded with heritage-related things, and one heavily loaded with living culture festivals, things that people create nowadays. So I call them cultural heritage and living culture component. We'll go a little bit more in details why this is crucial, but I'll give you only some of the elements of why this is done. First of all, the thing that you inherit from the past is the thing that you trust, that your parents have survived, or so that's why it matters. But it means also it is the thing that you will become completely predictable and rigid in your choices. Now, if you want to survive, as we know, what matters is that you are adaptable. So that's why you have to have this other ability cultivated, not only to replicate what is good for your survival, but to be able to create anew your identity and your evaluative system according to the changing environment for you to survive better. Right? This is the first thing. The second thing, it matters relationally, because if you don't want to change your ways, you can never learn from something which is outside. And then you're not curious enough to develop yourself, and you're not curious enough to allow others to contribute to your better world development. So that's how it plugs into the system and why it matters. So living culture and cultural heritage are two aspects that are not worse or better. They are both necessary, because if you are only replicating things from the past, obviously you're too stiff. But if you're only learning and all the time replicating whatever sways you around, well, everybody can turn you into anything, into a Nazi and a non-Nazi and again Nazi. So it's very unstable, unreliable. There's no sustainability and loyalty and social capital in such kind of a society. So it is not a society, it's a chaos of what's happening. So you need them in balance. Right? You want both to be stable, but to be learning. We'll turn back to this when we go to the cultural entropy measure, because this is a measure of balance, but which again comes from complexity. But now let's see first how, when you have cultural heritage and living culture, you can measure difference between cultures in a value-free manner. So if I compare myself with you, and you don't eat pork and I eat pork, okay? Imagine in every other sense we are identical. Okay? So now if I'm enough balanced to value my waste and your waste, it just won't matter for me, right? But if I am very much stuck into my ways and you don't care, you're okay with me doing anything and you just follow it for yourself. But I'm really stubborn about my ways. I start saying, well, that's wrong. You're doing something wrong. I don't want to cooperate. And the degree to which I will engage or disengage with you depends on how much this will matter for me. Because, and you can have a behavior that can be very open, very kind, and very anything, but I'm going driven by my perception for it, not by what objectively you're doing. So the subjective element is exclusively important in the way that the cultural distance matters. There is a difference that you can identify, but the difference may be perceived as a distance, which is nasty and to be acted against, and a source of hate for taste for discrimination. It can be not present when people will just rationally consider the choices, or it can go in the other direction. It can turn into a love for something, but also nepotism for something. Oh, I choose only this kind of thing because I think they're the better ones always. And there's no such thing. There is stupidity among every type of people and every type of going for a solution. Though the biggest wisdom is in the wisdom of crowds. And this we know it mathematically shown to us. So then it, however, matters whether we will have just one element of disagreement, or I will not like all the things that you're liking and vice versa, right? So then, well, I may be very tolerant, but we still have very different choices all the time, and then rationally we will be in a disagreement. So it matters to know the distance and the difference that people have, but it's very, very important when it will be a generator of troublesome cultural bias and when this bias will be kept at bay and at minimum. And the cultural policy that can be created with culture-based development is about keeping at bay this cultural bias element. I mean, we will be different, we will have conflicts, but not all conflicts. I mean, truth is born in the disagreement. So let it be, only let it be a rational disagreement and a reasonable one, rather than just driven by emotional fear of something being different. And therefore, I'm no, even if it's helping. So now, how do we get into understanding the dynamics of this cultural bias? The change between the balance between cultural heritage and living culture, when people will be stuck into the ways that they think, and when they will be more and more open to curiosity and recreation of their identity. Well, from complexity theory, there is a thing which is called entropy. Right? This is how fast the message will be allowed to be found out, depending on the components that the entity is built up of. You can use it both from the way it is applied in linguistics and the way it is applied in physical. You can give metaphors for it. So you can find this in the book, how it's done as a translation. I'll give you the final result. So what we do, we use the percentage of so the sum of living culture and cultural heritage, and the percentage that cultural heritage is in this sum, living culture is in this sum. This is all the information that you need in order to calculate how fast you will end up with finding the solution by using the cultural heritage. Because we have only two components, it's a mathematical fact that the cultural and the Shannon entropy for an entity of two components can vary between 0 and 1. Okay? So this is guaranteed to be precise by months, whatever the entity is, as long as it has two components. So if we accept that cultural heritage and living culture are the important two components, which has also other empirical things that Masoud will go into details, right? Then for anybody who is in policy making, we have now a reliable indicator. So whether you know or not how exactly it's estimated, well, it is estimated in a standard complexity theory manner, not invented by me or something. It just is varying between 0 and 1. And you know that when the entropy is the highest, the likelihood that things happen fastest is highest. So you have the cooperation, the ideas, everything transacted much more fairly and much faster. The information is percolating much faster to the social network. When and this is happening, you have entropy equal to 1. And it's guys, when you have the two classes, culture, heritage, and living culture, each with 50% present in them. Whenever one of the groups of attitudes starts growing, whether you will be getting more and more traditional or a little bit too and too hippie, right? You are starting to behave in a less sustainable, less efficient manner. You are allowing some kind of a cultural bias to start driving you away from the reasonable choice. So the reasonable choice much less often and much slower manages to go to the end user. This one way to think about it, to have it explained. But indeed, then you could intervene in the cultural bias and try to handle it. First of all, before it has become completely zero, when there will be complete disagreement, complete opposition, complete collapse of the system, right? And also, you will know by how much you will face trouble because of the cultural bias. So if it is growing by 10%, well, you will have bias here and loss of efficiency corresponding to this 10% of increase in cultural bias. If you have it 20%, you know that you have to take much faster measures because things are going fast to the demise. So it is a lot of information from policymaking point of view, even if you don't engage with the whole process of estimating the indicator, then you will be doing things your way, but informed how fast you have to do them and where you are in the process of the evolution of the whole system that is influenced by culture. And then the cultural bias chapter is explaining things in a standard choice economics model and things which are related to the permissible set. So it is starting from the very soft ways of defining culture from different disciplines and so on and so forth, and it is going step by step to, okay, how we translate all this information into thinking about culture as a factor for choice, which defines the permissible set and therefore creates a different permissible set in different cases and different biases in the process of choice. So essentially, culture-based development is cultural bias in economic choice. This is the perspective that it takes. Then very fast, I will go over the direct and indirect effects that the book looks at. So what I want to tell you about them is the examples given are choice to go to a place, which is cultural gravity, where people decide to go, and then cultural friction, which is the indirect effect. Once they're there, they create different frictions in their distribution of growth. It is known as spatial friction. The spatial frictions end up as models with, well, given where people want to go, which is like, well, cultural entropy. Then you have the dissolving of the contract curve. This is when you have the entropy completely into zero. People do not want to consider each other's possibility. When people in this state, nothing in the system works. So they want essentially great transformation. And for the 0 and 1 the switch in entropy, you need the condition of relative deprivation. Okay, people will be willing to completely disengage with one culture and go into another if their feeling of relative deprivation, in the sense that compared to other identical peers with which they have objective characteristics which are the same, they have lower chances for success in survival. They estimate it, they see that this culture that supposedly reduces their uncertainty essentially guarantees them that they will be the losers with comparable others. Problem is that a person decides which is the objective set of comparison. So somebody can say, well, I'll compare myself on the basis of gender and age, right? And they will not take into consideration education. So there is a subjective element of it. So the subjective relative deprivation is what is really important for when people will go into, and then there are models that can be done about it, and Martin will give one of these models discussed, which is the Thibault-Hirschman-Rothschild model. So how the Hirschman-Rothschild model of relative deprivation and the Thibault idea for what is the relative deprivation of the place in terms of public provision trigger this model, very much similar to the utility function that we saw yesterday in the one of the types of utility functions by Alan Ford's presentation. Do check it if you haven't been. Right. So this is what I will tell you for the content. If you want to know more about the book, it is available. And if you really want to buy it, I have kind of a 50% discount. I was supposed to bring the flyers and whatever, so I can give you this. I don't. But the sum up of it is that the first part tells you what is culture-based, what it means to be culture-based, and the other gives you different forms of development depending on the entropy. You have possibility of entropy to be between 0 and 1, and then you have some degree of cultural bias. When the entropy is 0, you have maxed cultural bias, but to the degree that the world collapses. And then you have a redefinition of the rules, and they do want this redefinition of the rules because according to the current rules, it's guaranteed that they have a survival disadvantage according to their perceptions. Right. So that's what. So if you want in a different way, one can say there is some room for Machiavellian policy making so that people work on the perceptions of people, not only on what they provide them. Or in other words, marketing is important, not only to produce something, but to explain what you have produced and deliver to people. It cannot be expected that they just will figure it out on their own. Again, more about this on the website. Some people read it, some very favorite people of mine, and very kind ones. The one is from Bologna University, Professor Corrado Benassi, who is very much, inequality relating theoretical guy, but very, very sincerely interested in meals, Joshua meals, and to rouse everything which is related to inequality is very dear to his heart. The other person who read it is, again, a prominent economist, but completely different. This is David Aldrich from Indiana University, who is dealing with competition and innovation. And so he's very interested in how culture and cultural cubism stops the innovation of certain groups. So especially the new innovators are suppressed by the ones who are already established cash cow firms of innovation, which is very funny because at the same time that he was working on this aspect of culture, there was the work of Alberto Bisi, who said, oh, actually, there is a great advantage, cultural advantage of those who become, elite, because now they have this premium, which is coming here. Depending on the view that you have, for some great news, for some bad news. So there is a very nice special issue on this particular thing with David and Michael Fritsch, the Roman Sandel guy, which is coming in Small Business Economics. And watch out about information on the website. It will be announced there, and there will be even workshops for writing contributions to it. So stay tuned. This is the way that I have presented things for an economist. Okay, so there are two ways that you can go about showing how culture emerges. The one is the market for lemons, which is in my paper on the market for values. The other way, and I have explained this briefly in the book, the other even simpler way, without uncertainty and incomplete information, you can have simply the use of the perfectly competitive market, where the price, what will give you certainty, is given by the market, so by culture itself. It's on aggregate level, and every individual is a supplier of behavior on this market. So they accept to value something according to what is prescribed to them, but depending on where their endogenous economic ability to survive puts their cost for survival, above or below this way of committing to value veiling, or to value eating of certain kind of meat, or whatever kind of requirement it has. If they are really, really poor and they need to survive, they will not consider this recommendation, because if you're completely hungry, whatever they tell you, they'll respect you and so on and so forth. You're living on the street, you find the stupid pork and you eat it because otherwise you remain hungry. So this, of course, can be translated and as a mechanism works in whatever kind of choice you decide. This is the cultural entropy, which, by the way, looks very similar to people who are familiar with the book of Putnam and the upswing. The first source I heard about is sitting over there. So if you have missed it, just have a look at it. He's using a different proxy. In the book, I'm talking about the 3 different ways that you can measure culture. One of the proxies is language, and Putnam is using language in order to describe this sway between being very stuck into I, or very much open for the we, okay, the procreation through learning from others. And it is mapping one-to-one with the cultural entropy thing. There is a paper which is coming in Politics and Policy, the journal, which is comparing the cultural entropy and the Putnam approach to the upswing. And of course, there are a lot of game theoretical applications, which then become better defined in their cultural aspect. For cultural economists, how cultural economics and economics of culture differ. Cultural economics is when you see culture as the input into the evolution of the world. economics of culture is when you see culture as the end product. Well, culture-based development is something that is staying there and holding these two elements by the hands in order to connect them. It's not enough to say, oh, I have produced those books only, because their real meaning is how they impact the world. But they're just one little drop into what culture does as a sector. So you have to do your counting and then to report it together in a proper way, calculated in order to know what it means for the world. And if you just take the sandal, you are really not strapping your boots well. You have much more to count about what culture does for this local development and why. There are wonderful papers here. One is mine, so how wonderful it is, this 1 point. But in it, you have the references about what it means to underspecify culture and how this underquantify culture, how this leads to underspecification of the model. The other is a very nice paper from Bruno Frey. No, so the one which is here is introduction to my special issue in Journal of Manpower, which is talking about the difference between economics of culture and cultural economics. The other one that I mentioned, it is another paper in the same special issue, which is titled Was Weber Right? Okay. But Bruno Frey and his colleague there, they also wrote much more recently about the difference between cultural economics and economics of culture. And other people like David Throsby have been working on this aspect as well. They just didn't have enough crowd around them. I didn't have a tribe around it to work for a long time. So if you're interested, let's make a crowd and pull them as well in order to, there are works by Throsby which are on the regional impact from economics, but they're much less than the rest of the world. This is on the multidisciplinarity, which I hope will be explained much more clearly by the intervention of Martin. But generally, there are microeconomics and macroeconomics per se, which are not connected. And the missing link is culture. So culture-based development is contributing to general economics because it links utility and preferences, which were not linked. But leave this alone. If you're a cultural economist, what it matters and how it matters to empower you in the argument with policymakers is that it is a mix between happiness economics and regional economics, which is a way to say in a more detailed way where exactly in the country it matters and by how much it needs to be increased and how it matters not only for being productive, but being mentally sane. So to cut along, like really about social psychology saneness. So not mad crowds, but sane crowds. How do you handle that? The aesthetic education is an old thing. It is very heavily considered in the way that cultural heritage and living culture is structured because cultural heritage is knowing yourself, living culture is knowing the other. Okay, so this is a pivotal thing in aesthetic education and humanism way of thinking. If you want to know more about aesthetic education, you can go into this brief of the Pascal International Observatory. It is a UNESCO OECD created observatory for learning cities. So recently, the people who established it created this brief because it is saying exactly, we are learning here not just skills, not lifelong learning only, which has been the focus for a while. Nobody says it does not matter. That matters. But we have learning also, which is aesthetic education learning of emotional intelligence skills, right? And they explained how there are different ways that this matters for faith and spirituality in cities, for increasing the creativity. Go check the brief. And ultimately, this narrows down that it's a discussion how culture contributes to the sustainable development goals. Because the Pascal Observatory is always thinking how the learning of cities contributes towards the goals of the OECD. And culture-based development, which is mentioned also in the brief, is the economics method that you can produce evidence for how culture has affected these goals. And but you much more understand what is the policy-making aspect of it, where then culture-based is just one kind of reference there in the whole story. Now I'm stopping my blah blah. I hope you won't mind a little bit to be with us for longer also in the break. And the floor is now first going to market. We'll wear 2 different hats and talk as 2 different people.
Thank you, Annie. Let me switch presentations.
So maybe if everybody's about 5 minutes and then we have. Yeah, I think the way that we spoke, you can 5-7 minutes if every one of you speaks, and then we have some time for questions.
I prepared 20, but let's try it in 5. So,
Well, we were generous, so we.
yes. So let's have a look from the culture-based development from the perspective of well-being economics and regional economics. So I'm a regional economist by training. I moved to well-being economics at some time, also called happiness economics. And happiness economics is considered a field that looks at the well-being of people, how well they are faring in their lives, and what is measured every year, and the ranking appears from that is the Cantrell ladder. And that is also the starting point, I think, to look at how does well-being economics looks at culture and culture-based development. Subjective well-being has for a very long time, since basically the beginning of the field in the 1970s, been concerned with culture and the importance of culture. I think there's a large literature in the early 90s also on the antecedents of the measurements of subjective well-being and how culture plays a role. It came mainly in that time from social psychologists. Then it faded a little bit away in the 2010s, but more recently it has become like more prominent again. And I think that the book by Annie can also very well contribute to this discussion. So, like, if we look at well-being economics, well, what are the questions that we ask? It are questions like the Cantrell ladder questions, which features prominently in the World Happiness Report. So, which is like imagining a ladder, steps from number to 10 at the bottom, or 0 at the bottom to 10 at the top. What is which step of the ladder are you at the moment? And so people are asked basically to evaluate their lives. And this question is now asked all around the world annually. So these are samples of at least 1,000 people per country per year. That gives like these kind of pictures of places in the world where people are happy or less happy. And then also is the question, does culture plays a role and is the way how we are measured not a very like Western way of measuring. And these are all kinds of questions that have been addressed in the field of happiness economics. So the happiness economics says, yes, Cantrell ladder is a valid assessment, but it's maybe also an incomplete measure of well-being. It's a very Western-centric measure. It's mostly also reflects on how Western populations think about what well-being is or should be. And what is also like shown is like based also on this Western perception. If you ask people the question about the worst or best possible life they are living, and it really elicits thoughts of wealth and power, as shown by like a nice experiment by Nielsen. And so what he is showing is people read the question about the Cantrell ladder. There are all kinds of variations on this question, whether there's a ladder involved or not. Climbing the social ladder is something that we think about in Western culture very much like related to wealth and power. And you see that then there are also kinds of different words or feelings or associated when people think about what people think about when they ask the ladder question. I don't go into detail now for time's sake, but that is like one thing on how culture can potentially play a role also in answering these questions and having a very Western-based view. For that reason, people also say maybe you have to look at different kind measurements of well-being apart from the Cantrell ladder that does not like involve like this Western-based view. So ask about different types of emotions. but also ask about different things. For example, in Africa, well-being is not a very individual thing. It's there that you cannot be happy without being very happy with your, or not, if your community is not happy, you cannot be very happy as an individual. And that is not very much incorporated in the current questions that there are about well-being. And that is maybe what we should also do when going to a more inclusive global measure of well-being. Or should we have a global measure? That can also be a question. Should we not have, apart from a question that we ask everyone, also culturally specific questions on measuring well-being? But there's not only discussion about whether the Cantwell ladder is a valid measure or not. It can also help us very much to study culture. So what the Cantwell ladder does is if you read the question about how people evaluate life, it captures both the current life evaluation and future aspirations, because it challenges people to think about their current life compared to the worst possible life that they can imagine, but also the best possible life that they have in mind. And what we know about aspirations, and that is also like the whole discussion that was about well-being in the 90s, is it something universal, or is it also in part culturally relative? Well, in part, of course, in some ways, like happiness is universal, especially when it comes down to some type of emotions, what we experience, whether that are also our body signals that we're in a good situation or not. But in part, well-being or happiness is not universal. It is also shaped by cultural norms. It's shaped by historical narratives. It's shaped by the media. And like culture informs these aspirations, which are like in a way directly measured by the Cantwell ladder. So that is also a way on how you can use the questions that are around in well-being economics to get information about like culture. It's also a useful way to find out how certain cultural psychological phenomena such as social comparison and adaptation work, and to what extent they are important. If you look at something like income, it's not only the absolute income that matters, it's also the relative income that can matter, and that might differ across cultures on how important relative income is. So if we look at CBD and happiness economics, so I think that if you look at culture-based development and happiness economics, well-being economics, that they both agree on the principle that the end goal of development is well-being. We don't produce economic growth for the sake of economic growth. We produce economic growth to live happily ever after. So, and also in the ideas of Adam Smith, it's an input to like well-being instead of an end goal in itself. What culture also helps with the CBD paradigm is helping us to understand what well-being means. And well-being and this development should also be defined by cultural values and aspirations of a society. And so culture affects in a way the preferences and utility of people, and can also therefore serve as an input in choice that maximize well-being. So what are some insights from culture-based developments that are very important for happiness economics? I think that if you look at the measurement, what we briefly discussed with the Cantwell ladder, the CBD provides like a quantitative layer that is necessary to interpret the happiness data. That is like, is an 8 in the Netherlands the same as an 8 in Bulgaria or an 8 in South Africa? So you need to also look at happiness data through like, or take the culture into also account when interpreting happiness data. In that sense, I think that many well-being economists also understand that if you ask questions like the Cantwell ladder, they're merely a starting point to engage in a discussion on how well people are varying, then like, and then they really provide a cool and valuable ranking in themselves. I think also the culture-based paradigm provides a qualitative lens in the end to contextualize the quantitative data. So like in the end, it's about the narrative and understand also how we can like improve society. If you look at the dynamics, so development over time, changes in culture also explain how and why well-being determinants shift over time. Well, Annie has been talking about the culture and entropy, so I'm leaving that behind. But the upswing is worthwhile reading after reading Annie's book, of course. Read that first. But also, so if you look at insights, other insights for happiness economics, what is still worthwhile to mention? Yeah.
Talking about culture here, then I'm not talking about social capital. Many people were pushing. I said, talking about social. No, I'm not talking about it. I'm talking about that. Oh, you're talking about institutions, no, I'm not talking about institutions. I'm talking about culture. So he's very, very clear about
So like the other thing about why culture-based development insights are important for happiness economics is that cultural-based development can explain like also why, or help us to understand why different people are not happy like with the same thing. So why do different factors matter across culture? And this is something that has not been very widely explored, I would say, in happiness economics, but I think that there is like increasing attention for this heterogeneity. So in a nutshell, what happiness economics can tell us what matters or what matters, and the CBD paradigm in the end tells us who's what matters, what word matters for whom under which circumstances, but also how it matters. So I think by combining the two approaches, you can get valuable insights that are in the end also valuable for policy making, but also for individuals. Then very briefly, regional economics, which is basically, I wouldn't call it my old field since I'm still like a little bit active in it, but in regional economics, like happiness economics and cultural economics, I think that they share a little bit that they are the fringe of economics. So like, I won't like to say that they're the outcasts, but they look a little bit different at the world, I think, than like mainstream economics does. But in regional economics, there has been for a long time attention for culture, but in a little bit different way than I would say from the CBD paradigm onwards. What I work myself in is like cultural as a kind of amenity, which can also like promote economic growth through agglomeration economies, so the concentration of economic activity, spillover of ideas. But also within the regional economics literature, local culture can be seen as an input for tourism, or there has been research on the geography of participation in arts. There's been social capital. I think that what the CBD approach can add to it is that it approaches culture as kind of endogenous capital that also influences people's choices that they made. It also constrains people's choices in a way. So if you look at the Coleman's bathtub model, or the Coleman boat in some other literatures, then you have here the macro level and the regional circumstances, which also includes the culture that can influence firm orientations, but also individual orientations, and then influences also the firm performance. I use this graph also to explain how agglomeration economies or culture can affect like the actions of firms and then also influence the firm's performance. But the orientations are in that sense shaped also by the local culture and the local institutional context that's it's combined. And that is also what the CBD paradigm in that sense can add. It can add an understanding also of this relationship between these regional circumstances or regional culture and how individuals and firms in the end behave. Well, we did that also like in the little research on the Netherlands. This is not about firm behavior, but mostly about like voting behavior of people, where we have looked at why do you see the rise of populism in the Netherlands, but also why do you see it in certain municipalities and not in other municipalities? Of course, in part that has to do with sorting effects. So different types of people, different types of municipalities, but it also has to do with local culture and also that balance between living culture, cultural heritage, which is like, yeah, gets in a way unbalanced also because of the disappearance of people in some areas. So areas are gonna feel left behind due to insufficient investment in cultural heritage. Also people moving away, and these people, and that is like also in the Hirschman-Rothschild type of modeling, they at some point feel left behind, and then they try to also in a way that leads to behavior that people are drawn to the more populist parties in a way, almost out of anger. So that is like, yeah, in a nutshell, like also how it can be applied to the regional context. There's some other CBD literature related to regional economics, which is interesting to look at. Yeah, it's all those the Thibaut Hirschman-Rothschild model, and also given time's sake, I'll stop here. Yeah.
Two different of blood for 10 minutes is quite enough. Now, let's continue with the more empirical output. And at the end, we will hear Fana to finish with her questions. If you can also question, we'll combine. And then later on to the question to wrap up what I think might say this part.
Yeah, that's no.
So think of questions that you can ask fast.
So the presentation gets started. So thank you very much, Annie. First of all, congratulations for this big achievement. So we know each other from the time that we both were PhD students. I'm not a cultural economist. I'm a regional economist, but I really focus on labor mobility, especially on migration and people mobility from one region to other, internal or external migration. But whatever I do, there is an aspect of culture, which I'm lucky that I got connected with Annie, and with Annie we published some papers where I'm going to discuss at least two of the papers that we did together. Of course, I'm not going into the details of the paper, but I will just try to explain what we did together, especially at the level of individual culture consumption and regional, let's say, culture amenities.
Yeah, I'm sorry, like
No, it's good.
it gets.
So that's the point. So I will start. The presentation will come.
Yeah, it will come back.
So the thing is that what I'm trying to talk about. No, it is the same. So the thing is that in terms of the culture-based development, especially the culture aspect, I think Annie tried to explain it very well during her presentation. But it is actually true that it is not a monodimensional. It's a multidimensional aspect. And if you take into account and reduce the dimension of a data set, and as Annie also pointed out correctly, you come up with two main distinctions in terms of the culture. And one is living culture, and the other one gonna be culture heritage. So these two are very important. And of course, based on the data set, and if you apply the right statistical method, then it can, thank you very much, it can come up, you can do, or you can cluster these variables and you can get information from within. So we have applied two of the methods in our papers. One is we applied factor analysis. I think we applied factor analysis. Why? Because of the fact that the difference between principal component analysis and factor analysis is the fact that we have the assumption that in factor analysis there is an error. So each variable does not share 100% of their variation with others, but there is a margin of error there. But in principal component analysis, the assumption is that it 100% share everything. So that's why we applied the factor analysis, and as a consequence, we identified some of the factors and walked through it. I don't know, we will. So yeah, so let's talk about the causality. Like culture and like a social capital, culture capital can also provide some causal effects.
I'm not a dictator. You can take your time, so you can measure the mixture modeling. There were other.
It will. I think it's coming up. Is it? Oh, well, yeah, here. It was. Yeah. So in terms of identifying how the clusters can be done, one way was to do principal component analysis, factor analysis, but we also applied another method which we call it finite mixture models. And what does that type of modeling? It does is the fact that it tries to identify similar regions or clusters within a country, and then they can be grouped together. And I'll discuss this in the papers that we did together later on. Yeah. So I was talking about this effect, which is about the causality. Of course, like social capital, cultural capital can also produce causal effect, but if it is rightly done, of course, there is an endogeneity with the estimation, but we have to find out the right instrument variable to capture that and correct it, and then we can talk about the causal effect. So let me now talk about the first paper, where it's about migrants who are equally educated in the Netherlands. It's from the Maastricht University. Graduate students were surveyed 10 months after their graduation, and then they were assessed whether they found an employment, whether the education, the salary, and a lot of other information are there. So I did the first paper, and I found out that migrants are suffering. Both generation of migrants, first and second generation of migrants, are suffering from the wage. And there is a decrease of wage between the first and second migrants with the native. And I published this paper, and then I had the chance to talk this with Annie, and we talked about it. Yeah, so I could not explain it very well. What was the factor behind this weight differences between the between native first and second generation? Because we have the assumption the second generation of migrants are totally assimilated in the society, and as a consequence, there shouldn't be any weight differences. But still, I found out that there is a significant weight difference. What we did, we sat together, and we thought Annie, even at that time, had a very strong idea behind the culture-based development, and we came up with the theory, and we applied this theory at the two levels, at the individual level and at the regional level. At the individual level, we took variables like habits of reading, going to the concert or a museum, and consumption of culture. And at the regional level, we applied some of the identifiable factors like culture, heritage, and living culture. So these two really improved the analysis and explained why certain generation of migrants were lagging behind in terms of the wage and compared with the native. So this is the first part where we applied. And the second paper, which was published on regional studies, it's a paper where in cooperation with other colleagues like Alessandro Crocetta. He was at the in Italy, and also the other author. What we did here was actually we tried to see if inequality in Italy can be explained by different types of the culture and also social capital within Italy. Of course, in Italy, there is a discussion of third Italy, where Italy is divided into three major parts: the developed and middle and less developed part. And the level and let's say commercialization of the culture within Italy is from the culture perspective is different. For example, if you go to Rome, then you're bombarded with culture heritage, while the same level of culture heritage existed in Sicily or in other parts, but it's not as commercialized as it is it's commercialized in Rome and, for example, France. So these type of debates brought us into an idea to apply this culture-based development theory and explain inequality within Italy. So we made some introductions with of cultural heritage and living culture with some variables like about inequality, and we found out that part of the inequality within the regions in Italy can be explained by these factors. I think, I can stop here because these are the main aspects that we applied, even though I'm a labor economist or regional economist, but it's still, I think, at both levels. It doesn't matter whether. Exactly. Yeah.
And always compare the model with the culture development. Culture, and we saw that this improves the models. Not when you're modeling people, and then you model places, always the same way.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And this made it. I'm very bad with the protocol.
Help.
But I really sincerely appreciate both the people who are speaking here and you for being here and being so switched on.
I think we're 15 minutes left, right? 14, now 14. I will try to.
Of which I have 7 because
I still need some questions. I will skip through some sheets, but and stick to what I think is mostly relevant. I'm Anna. I work for this city, Municipality of Rotterdam. I am working at the cultural department, and I specialize in nightlife and events. So that's why my examples are mostly geared to that. My colleagues are more into museums, theaters, but I know the general cultural policy, of course. I've been born and raised here. My parents are artists. So I will give you an insight into the city, how it works here, and how it ties into the CBD theories. Let's skip the next one. Yeah, I think what Annie already talked about, why it is important, what culture does to you. A big example, this is a summer carnival in Rotterdam. I think it's the biggest one in Europe. It's very popular. And why it started was because of the municipality. Rotterdam is the poorest city in the Netherlands. There are a lot of different socio-economical classes. A lot of our money from the municipality goes towards welfare. And I think 20 years ago or 15 years ago, they really thought a lot of people in the city don't have the money to go on holiday. And we have a very multicultural base, so a lot of different culture. I was brought up in the south, which is mostly the poorest part, and there wasn't a minority. Every has a different cultural background, and for me, it was very normal to see different colors, different backgrounds. I ate roti, I ate Asian food. It was very normal for me as a kid to be. in that place. And I later on found out in the Netherlands that's not normal. Rotterdam is an outlier in that sense. But yeah. 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 So the municipality thought we need to give everybody in the city a way of having a holiday and celebrating themselves. And I think that's a very important example. And right now it's UNESCO Heritage has the title. It's very, it has its status, but it started out Rotterdam people celebrating their own culture, and then other cultures within the city celebrating with them. They don't know, they don't have the same background, but they know I live in Rotterdam. They're different people. I'm gonna go watch. It's free. It's voluntary. A lot of the dancers are just people from the city or from the Netherlands who work the whole year on their their dance and their cards. But I think this is a very important how policy advisors look at it in this city, why culture matters. People want to see themselves. They want to be where they live. They want to be able to be themselves and celebrate themselves. So today I will, now I will talk about culture policy in two ways. Some go further into aesthetic education and then link our data set with what CBD does. And I don't know if there's time for my questions, but I think it's better for you to ask questions in the end. Before Rotterdam, I worked in the city of Delft. So I really saw the difference between the two ways of economics for culture. So in Delft, I was working at the economics department and doing events policy. And Rotterdam, I'm at the cultural department, which is a big difference. So in Delft, it was pretty much more geared towards the outcome. What's the economic impact? How many visitors are coming? And that's the reason why I came to Rotterdam, because it's a very different way of viewing what cultural policies do. So it's much more geared towards social cohesion. What can you do for your city dwellers? Why does it make the city better and not the outcome? I put here, you have the All Caps Festival in Rotterdam, which is urban sports, urban culture festival, which gives aesthetic education for an all different group who doesn't go to a museum typically or goes to opera. But it's as important as the others. Well, Annie already explained about aesthetic education, and I read that paper, because what are cities learning in order to bring peace and human flourishing? No, I think Rotterdam is a learning city. We do think that I had to break my brain a bit about what is aesthetic education, because we also have cultural education for small kids, which is we pay for that, but aesthetic education is lifelong learning. So it's like, then I finally found what the meaning is, and that is essentially, if you go to culture, you educate yourself. And I think this is the crux, because I feel like sometimes we are preaching to the choir. We are the municipality is organized by pillars. The budget is organized in pillars. The world is organized in pillars. Even the political system is organized in pillars. So most of the time I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. So I talk with people who also already think that culture is important. And I think that we need to break down those silos, especially to ensure investment, because we all know that it helps better society, better people, but the money is earned in building. So it's a challenge for us right now to make sure other people understand that it's good for their silo to invest in culture. And I think we need evidence-based policy to convince other people to give money to culture, because it helps their silo or their sector as well. And I think that's where CBD can help, because it creates evidence, it creates data to say to an economist who is only looking at the harbor and what revenue that if you want a good harbor, you need to have talent to the city. Talent doesn't go to the city where there's nothing to do. They want to have culture. They want to have fun as well. So then you need evidence to prove that. Well, I did read the book, but mostly the conclusion, because that's where at the end of every chapter, there's a short conclusion which gives more insight into aesthetic education and policy implications. So that's what I'm mostly focused on. And now what we are doing, we found out that we already were on the good track, according to Annie, because we are now working from, we make policy from the starting point that every city dweller should be able to go to culture or feel welcome, feel a lower threshold to go. Because we have communal money, we should think, you should think that it goes to all the community equally. So we have a cultural segmentation model, which plots every citizen or every household in the city into a certain segment. And based on that, we do research for institution, particularly what kind of visitors they attract. And then they can see, okay, I only attract these kind of visitors. I want to have more younger or this kind of audience. How do I get there? And then this model gives information on that. But we also use it for urban planning. So we now plotted the whole city, what kind of people live where, and what they need to go to culture, to the arts and culture. And some people just, they're maybe older, they don't want to go to the city center, they want to have it nearby, they just want to go to a movie night. That's all in this model. So we know as a cultural department, if there's a building free, and we get the question, do you need this building and what should we put in it? If it should be a theater or a more local sports and culture space, or maybe more education, more for kids, if there are more families in the neighborhood. So we now, urban planning is very much geared to this cultural segmentation model. And we use it for evaluation. If the money we spend goes to everybody or only certain cultural groups, which is not the goal. And I think this ties into the cultural heritage and the living culture, because the cultural segmentation model entertains both. So you just see with every group, what kind of papers do they read? What kind of culture do they want to go to? Some groups go to everything and are willing to travel across the city, and some groups, yeah.
Instead to get all the data.
Yeah.
Do culture-based development. No, we gave this kind of very well map in terms of segments. So you know where your intervention then supposed to provide. But we're looking for the moment only in terms of how much is provided in urban places. Who do it, no problem. How the vision relates with the other areas.
Yeah.
It's just a question of calculating the important development, and then you can decide to go to the other side. And go them and by the way, by having it here, look what I'm producing for you.
Yeah.
It's not only about the as a lump sum, it can be local to the firms, it can be local well-being of people.
Yeah, exactly. That's now the blind spot we have. We have supply, we have demand, and we can evaluate if that matches. But we don't know how to explain to other sectors why they should invest to make that better. But our policy is pretty much already geared towards balancing the two. And I think it's, for us as a city, imperative that people have I think less cultural bias, because we are such a multicultural city. We need everybody to be open towards each other. And because otherwise it wouldn't be fun to live here, because there are so many different people. There are people who don't eat pork. There are people who don't eat beef. There are people, so much difference. And then you need to have the view that even though somebody else is different, it's okay. And it's a way to be curious, like you said in your book, and not as a threat. That's cultural entropy, right? between two. Yeah. Yeah. So I had some questions for you to maybe what rose up in my head after reading it. But I think because of the time, maybe questions in the group are more interesting. But this is my stuff. Yeah.
You did a heroic job for presenting for a much shorter period. I was very egoistic of talking much longer than any one of you, but you did give this perspective of what I'm saying, how it is heard and said from the different groups that this book is written for. So the way it's written, it's not written only for economists. You won't find only the economic choice modeling there, right? It is written in a manner that other people can relate to it according to the perspective from which they're sitting. So for regional economists, for instance, it's very important for them to finally sort out the ducks and know that social capital and cultural capital are two different things, and social capital comes from cultural capital. So there is a chain rule, and that's why it's called culture-based development, because many things are looked at, but they start from culture, so you arrange the things from there. And culture is not just a factor that creates heterogeneity, but it is something which defines why people have different utility, especially if you're wearing another hat of if you're looking at the micro and macro, culture-based development is actually a market where the macro and the micro are trading. The macro of culture and the micro of the individual. This is the very market for them. This is a typical thing. And this can be found then in any kind of choice that you're studying, whether it be choice on micro level, choice on macro level. This component of the cultural bias given from culture and culture is always there in the same way, because it was all created as a world using this as information, what is given that in the world. And whatever you're choosing it is to be this chain rule pointing to the same point in the beginning of the region. And ultimately, the questions that you had were meant to single out the fact that CBD doesn't say stop what you're doing till now. It says use it in a different way that will empower you to make your point outside of what you currently are. So maybe it's really best that you come with your questions and then we wrap up what emerges from the discussion. Anybody can? Yeah, sure. Tell also who you are.
Your presentation has been nice and interesting, but I want to know the definition of cultural bias, because the cultural bias is in economic terms as a cultural externality, cultural good externality. No, it is. It's true.
Some literature can define it. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So I want to know the cultural goods of definition, the changes over time. So how can be this is expressed in data? So because this is very important for the when we consider the economic growth. So which one is positively affect for the economic growth? But the definition of the goods, the changes, we cannot distinguish that.
Okay.
So
Very, very nice question. If you're okay, I can answer it and then you deal with that. So culture-based development is different than what you read out there. So you can think of culture as something which is having an externality, and essentially there is a spillover from using it and so forth. But this is if you apply kind of a macro-theoretical thinking of the model. And I'm saying that there is an interaction between the micro and the macro. And in order to understand what's happening, if you just look at the macro, you are having ecological reference of all these things. You observe that there is some kind of spillover, but why? And if you overzoom into the books and you just count how many books, you actually cut off the spillover. altogether from what you are analyzing. So the way that I redefine things is that once you engage with the books, which you know how many have been exposed, and you introduce information about the type of the book, whether it's culture, heritage, or living culture, you now can talk about another product of it, which is the cultural capital that the individual has. And now you have information and ways to understand how the choice will have cultural bias. And here I define the cultural bias as deviation from the economically optimal choice. Right?
Yeah.
So it is loss of efficiency in the individual choice making. And of course, this deviation is what gives you the going away from the macro. But that's exactly the identification of the source and the precise amount that this will be within the individual. And then you just sum up all these things, and it's multiplied by all the choices done in the economy, which obviously is a huge multiplication effect on the biasing that will happen and the deviation from efficiency. And you can't capture it directly from just, oh, this was from the book. Because it depends how many people will read the book and engage with it and make it part of the decision-making process, which is happening as well. Yeah.
This is not an economic question. Thank you for your presentation. I wanted to ask, because I was thinking of culture then development. In places like, in many places, that is where I come from, the demographics is really, when I attended this, I was expecting if there is any hint that you think, I would like your opinion if there's any hint that it can contribute to improving the.
We talked about you and we hoped about you, but here you are now again. Yes? Yeah, continue.
I just want to ask if you think there is any PCBs that can help in this problem, because for you to have developing you need people, and sometimes in many places people are disappearing. So
If they're disappearing, that's the whole problem with culture-based development. It can be applied, and it makes sense to be applied when the bias, the culture bias that we're talking about, is between 0 and 1. You just have an opportunity and time to intervene culturally in the system while it is just having the trouble from the cultural bias, and it's going away from efficiency. So you do something, you bring it back to the efficiency of the market, and so people felt it don't die and they don't kill each other and they're living harmoniously at their best, what they know and can do. If things go to the extreme, where the cultural bias is at max and they just cannot see each other's point of view, and they always negate the other based on statistical discrimination, and just have taste discrimination, complete 100% for anything that's coming from the other side. So whatever your utilities might be absolutely identical, but you cannot have a contractor because you always multiply with minus 100% whatever the other one wants, which is really identity economics kind of, but you know where it comes from this balancing of the cultural capital. Right? If you go to this degree, well, culture-based development can help for the next world that you will set up, because this is the whole game. All the individuals, they want to survive, right? And they have taken up the game with this culture because it improves their survival. Now, if it has been proven to them that they have complete loss from playing the game, they disengage with the culture, with all its institutions, and they require another cultural code, which will set other institutions that will guarantee them that they have a better and equal chance of survival with identical peers. Right? So it will help for the other world. But what will happen meanwhile, just like in the absolute maximum entropy, you have maximum rationality, we have zero bias, and people are producing their best. Well, in the zero case, they kill each other and they vanish, and there is nothing to do about it. I mean, it's not about exorcism here. And on the other side, really metaphorically, it's like working on something which prevents hair loss. And it's a very nice metaphor, because you can do something about people who are losing hair with your treatment, which is disability treatment, which can also be for hair loss. But if they become completely bald, you cannot grow new hair on a bald head. So you have to intervene while cultural entity and the cultural bias is between 0 and 1. You want to bring it at 1. This is utopia. This is a perfectly competitive market. It does not exist. It does not exist for many reasons. right? But you want to keep it at bay because if you don't, and it goes to the zero cultural entity, then people kill each other. And then it's very difficult to bring them see the obvious things which are good for them.
Bring that to each other, but then leave.
Leave
Yeah,
because
or
that's- yeah.
not
Or leave.
have the next generation. At least
Yeah.
the
All the young people are
The young
living, yeah,
people,
the same in
yes.
Rotterdam.
Well, about if it is just about you have blood drain on top of the, the brain drain, then it's a simple question of the aftermath of cultural gravity, which is a case between 0 and 1. Well, the blood drain might end up in being completely unattractive place, complete zero culturally. So people run out from there with whatever they can do, and then you have economic tools to make an incentive and cultural tools to make an incentive for people to come and stay. But I don't think that the problem is people. I mean, old people, young people, people of any color, size, and whatever are okay, and they can work together, and they can make a place flourish as long as they change their attitude and mindset of how they do that. So that's the point. Otherwise, young, old, we have a lot of old people in Europe, but they're not the problem. They're quite more sensible than new generation that not spies for different reasons, right? So there is nothing that guarantees you that you have lost creativity or that you have lost, opportunity to make new things just because you're open. That's the whole point of lifelong learning and aesthetic education and this continued growth, humanistic growth of people throughout their time, which you want to maintain through, fine-tuning their value system to be open to curiosity rather than closed in a silent, self-defensive, fear-driven mode. Young or old, they can fall into this. But the nice thing is that it's about a psychological spectrum of fear that is intervened through aesthetic education, through the exposure of cultural consumption, for every person. So a person can become a Nazi and can become a Nazi fighter. And that, by the way, there is this movie which now came up, which is Cure the Hate, which is based on a case of personal lives. So people are not good or bad intrinsically. They're more like, Steppenwolves. They can do many things. But the question is, you want them to enter into a mental zone which is the best for them, which is a balanced way of thinking, and not one driven completely from fear, which leads to the highest cultural bias, loss of many opportunities for cooperation. I hope it's
yeah,
Answer.
give me some.
Will apologize in advance if my impression will be I'm not sure. I'm a young researcher, just starting my career. I'm a somebody software PhD at Annie, and I would like to ask you some explanation about what you told before in terms of the neutrality of culture, in the sense that we can consider culture as an input for utility at micro level. And what I was asking myself is if culture is an input for utilities, utility functions, I can understand that we could say that it is not just about good and bad culture, but at the same time, I think that the process we follow to build our utility functions influences also affects other people. So I don't get how should we consider culture such a neutral in terms of conflict. I read Bourdieu and his theory of social conflict, which is different, as you told before, the concept of social capital and cultural capital. But still, I'm still wondering why should we consider culture as a neutral aspect?
Well, there are many ways to answer this question, but I think the most important is I don't think that culture is element of the utility function. So if you think of a mechanism design, you have the utility functions and they'll be doing certain kind of stuff, but in order to understand what will be chosen, you first have some set of things that they'll be choosing from, right? And they will be then organized in some kind of order of preferences. They'll want one of the things more than others. And what culture is the cutoff from everything that's possible to be chosen, what will be chosen and what won't be chosen. So this cutoff is the only thing that will be at all chosen, right? So this is how it is a permissible set that drives what will be chosen. And also it is telling you how the options for choice will be ranked, right? And there is where we were talking about how the utility creates the order of preference. Now it's another kettle of fish how the utility functions themselves are shaped. And I think the utility function of people is just about survival. Okay, so they want to survive and they're choosing from anything which is in the options out there according to this listing. How good is it for their survival? Right? But some of the options are not allowed according to the cultural circumstance in which they are. So that's how I think it makes more precise understanding of how the behavior of these people will evolve. And they also take into consideration not only this subjective cultural thing, which is used only to reduce their uncertainty. That's why it's, so uncertainty is part of their utility function. That's the survival thing. Their utility function is driven by uncertainty, which they're trying to minimize. But in this thing, it's endogenous. That's why culture is endogenous, because they have there the things that they need for survival. So first of all, this is food. This is anything which is the Mincer equation. Who I am and how it makes me able to get the means for survival. There is also the happiness thing, because we use our lifetime, which is our existence, right? On the one side to get money to survive, but also feel a little bit I'm here for a while, right? Before I fade out and droop as a flower. And in this process, I want to be certain. So these are the three things which are the kind of the standard survival function, which is the utility function of people, the elements of it. And the way that this depends on culture is the permissible set. So the world is out there. I relate with the world, which objectively has some things, and I value these things according to how they help me survive in terms of objectively, subjectively, and uncertainty.
Maybe because the identity is part of the utility function, which is now culturally.
I don't think
Trained.
so. No, it is modeled sometimes so. But
Guys,
I think it emerges, identity emerges on the basis of sorting of people in terms of how they manage to survive. Right? Well, their permissible set is acceptable, not mutually, deniable. It allows cooperation between them, and they have the same economic incentive. So it makes sense. They have a reason why, survival-wise, to group together in order to seek benefit, to create a club with which they can empower their fight for survival with everybody else in the world. So, and that's why it's culture-based. It's true. Identity economics is true. Taste for discrimination is true, but it all comes from culture. It's all culture-based. If you want to understand how to tackle it, once you know that it matters for the world, you can say, okay, hate matters, okay, identity matters. So how can I change this? Well, you have to change the cultural exposure so that they start valuing things and thinking that their survival sits in a better. Otherwise, you just observe that people are killing each other and food or hair. You were first here.
I would like to list. I'm starting my master's of economics and entrepreneurship in September, so it's very new for me. I come from the art academy, so it's very interesting to see the different worlds and how they can collaborate and they also fraction. So I'm very happy to listen to all the questions and all the knowledge that I definitely do not have yet.
So you are one of those people who are making entrepreneurship in the arts, and they will try you to measure this to show that you're doing something economic. And this will be leading you systematically to under quantifying the impact from culture, because the fact that culture exists and there's cultural entrepreneurship means that culture reinvents, and this reinvention is exclusively and cruciatingly important, not just by the fact that we have employment in culture, but because this place reinvents its identity and it's open to it. And this is a signal that the society will have a milieu and we will have a cultural, we will have identities which are able to cooperate with each other. And the less there is entrepreneurship of this type of cultural type, this will be a signal for the local authority that the cultural entropy is going down, that this place doesn't want to reinvent itself, is not able to reinvent itself for the way that the market there is going. People are not offering it and people are not buying it because can't survive as an entrepreneur. They're not interested in recreating their identity and, humanistically being open, curiously new and, learning anything new. And this means that this place is on its way to demise in terms of socioeconomic development, and not just because the flowerful and colorful cultural sector won't be there, which if they don't care about at the first place. What strikes me is that economists who are giving the budgets are treating the cultural sector very much like Nazi or kind of ultra-right. They say, oh, this is kind of leftist thing, hobby, which, prove me that it is important. The people who love it say, oh, it's aesthetic education, but they cannot put a number and say, well, it is breeding cultural capital, which is about emotional intelligence, the same way that, proper education, the way we understand it, at school, is about building your skills and having intellectual skills. So the one is having emotional skills, the other is having emotional intelligence, the other is about having the cognitive intelligence, and you need both in order to be really as a member of society, not as a robot, max functional and contributive to the group. But this is what is the argument to be made. What is the impact of culture? To bring it from the beginning. Why culture matters? Economics of why is necessary, and that's what culture-based development does. That it matters, we know. That we can predict how exactly and how terribly things will go wrong. We do know it from wonderful models from mostly Gary Becker and Ari Rubinstein. These two books are the core and the start of understanding why culture matters. Afterwards, you know why. And Akerlof's model with the collapse of the market. Right? There is need for it because of the asymmetric information. How do we decrease this? Well, by creating this culture that will be the middleman that decreases the uncertainty. And it will allow the market to operate. So that's why the market for values is actually a generalized case of the market for levels. So if you're curious about this, watch out for this book, for these papers, and keep asking why culture matters for the rest of the world, not just for within the cultural sector. Yeah. Thank you very much for your attention. Thanks for to the speakers for being here so early, for doing everything possible with their own resources, and to you for your time and curiosity. How do we stop the recording?
I'll stop it.
Or it stopped?
And then we still have to get it from my computer, I think. And
I have to go to the session for that on the other side. That's quickly, really. But I'm going to go.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. And yeah, I'm going to go and just the coffee like chat. I don't mind missing the coffee. I'm not that keen on the coffee yet.
No.